How do we as humans even begin to process the idea of massive, terrifying change? When the very structures of our lives start to feel like they're crumbling, where do we look for a map? Well, across cultures and across time, we've developed these incredible symbolic systems to help us navigate those moments. Today, we're going to dive into two of them that seem like they're from completely different universes: the ancient, fierce iconography of a Hindu goddess and the modern, celestial language of astrology. And what we're going to find is pretty wild. They might just be tapping into the exact same human truths about transformation.
And that really brings us to the big question, doesn't it? Why do we build monuments, tell these epic stories, and create entire philosophies around the very forces that scare us the most? Whether it's the raw power of nature, personified as a goddess of destruction, or the cosmic clockwork of the planets promising some major upheaval, there's this deep, deep human need to give a face to radical change.
So let's dive into our first big parallel, the terrifying face of change. And you'll see, neither of these systems is shy about using shocking imagery. In fact, they lean into it, almost suggesting that to really get what transformation is all about, you have to be willing to stare its most terrifying face right in the eyes.
Okay, let's start with the Hindu goddess Kaali. Her whole look is intentionally challenging. It's meant to rattle you. She completely upends the concept of what a goddess should be with her naked form, her connection to cremation grounds, and this, bloodlust. This is not a goddess you turn to for gentle comfort. Her appearance is a deliberate confrontation, and it's designed to shock you right out of your everyday assumptions about how the world works.
Okay, now this is where the connection gets really fascinating. When you put this ancient, super visceral imagery right next to the language that modern astrologers use for their most intense planetary events, especially what they call transits of the planet Pluto, the parallels are just striking. A garland of severed heads becomes being reduced to a pile of ashes. Haunting cremation grounds perfectly mirrors the death and rebirth process. It's like they're sharing this vocabulary of a beautiful but absolutely necessary terror.
So the crucial point here is this. All this shocking imagery isn't about promoting random chaos. Not at all. It's actually a highly sophisticated symbolic language. Both systems are using the metaphor of complete and utter destruction to point towards a very specific kind of change. A transformation so profound that the old you has to completely die for something new to even have a chance to be born.
All right, next up, let's look at the engine that's driving all this change, time itself. Because both of these systems personify this inescapable force as this great creator and also this great consumer.
To really understand Kaali, you have to start with one Sanskrit word, Kala. This one little word holds this powerful duality that is the absolute key to our identity. On one hand, it means time, the ever-turning wheel of existence. But it also means black, the color of the void, the nothingness from which everything comes and to which everything eventually must return.
And this just brilliantly illustrates who she is at her core. Her name, Kaali, is literally the feminine form of Kala, so she's not just some goddess who exists within time, she is time itself. She's the active, dynamic, feminine principle of time as this all-consuming force, the relentless devourer who births everything and then, in the end, brings it all to its final conclusion.
And then you look over at astrology, and you find this fascinating counterpart, the planet Saturn. Now, if Kaali is the wild, cyclical force of time, Saturn is its hard taskmaster. It represents linear time, the clock that just keeps ticking forward, bringing consequences, teaching us lessons through boundaries, limitations, and karma. It's a different vibe for sure, but the core theme is identical, time as a great and often very difficult teacher.
This powerful idea of time being personified didn't just appear fully formed overnight. As you can see from this timeline, Kaali's identity evolved over centuries. She first pops up simply as one of 7 flaming tongues of the fire god Agni, just devouring offerings. It's not until way later, in the Devi Mahatmya around the 6th century AD, that she really emerges as the ferocious, independent deity we recognize today. It just goes to show you how these powerful concepts gather more and more symbolic weight over time.
Okay, so this brings us to the core purpose of all this terrifying destruction. In both traditions, it serves this incredibly profound psychological and spiritual function, the annihilation of the ego. And this isn't about self-hatred or anything like that. It's about transcending the limits of our own small, isolated sense of self.
And to really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at Kaali's most defining story,
her epic battle with a demon named Raktabija. And trust me, this is way more than just a cool monster story. It's a powerful allegory for a battle that takes place inside every single one of our minds. So here's how the story goes. The gods are fighting this demon, Raktabija, whose name basically means blood seed. And he has this incredible power. Every single time a drop of his blood hits the ground, a perfect copy of him springs into existence. So the more the gods fight him, the worse the problem gets. It's an absolute nightmare. So out of sheer desperation, the great goddess Durga summons Kaali from her own forehead. And Kaali does what no one else could. She spreads her massive tongue across the entire battlefield, drinking every drop of blood before it can create a new demon, and then she just consumes the original and all his clones, ending the cycle for good.
And this is just such a brilliant illustration of a deep psychological truth. Raktabija isn't some external monster. He's an allegory for the mind's tendency to get stuck in these negative thought loops. I mean, think about it. You have one anxious thought, you try to fight it, and suddenly you have 10 more, each a perfect clone of the first. The myth is telling us that the only way to break this cycle isn't to fight the thoughts, but to apply this radical, all-consuming awareness, personified by Kaali, that just stops them from ever taking root in the first place.
And this ancient idea finds such a powerful echo in the way modern astrology interprets Pluto. Astrologers often use the metaphor of a caterpillar's transformation. It doesn't just grow wings, right? It literally dissolves into a kind of primordial soup inside the chrysalis. It has to completely cease to be a caterpillar. It's this process of death and suffering that seems totally meaningless until the moment the butterfly emerges, completely transformed, renewed, and empowered.
And you know, this theme of ego death isn't just about Pluto. Looking into the future, astrologers are seeing this major convergence of planetary energies around 2026, involving Saturn and Neptune, that all point toward this exact same theme, the absolute necessity of ego surrender.
So, one of the biggest astrological events of the decade is going to be the conjunction, that's when two planets meet at the same point in the sky, of Saturn and Neptune. We already met Saturn, the planet of structure and ego. Wow, Neptune is its total opposite, the planet of dissolution, spirituality, of oneness. So when these two get together in Aries, the sign of the self, the cosmic message is pretty clear. It's time to dissolve the old structures of the ego.
And the crucial point that astrologers are making about this big upcoming transit is that the path forward isn't through more effort or trying to build up the ego. No, true liberation, or moksha as it's called in the Hindu tradition, comes from letting go. It's about finding freedom from the ego's constant struggle, which sounds an awful lot like what happened in the Raktabija myth, doesn't it? So, if the old isolated ego is destroyed, what takes its place? What are we reborn into? Well, interestingly, both of these symbolic systems point in the exact same direction, away from a focus on the individual and towards a deep embrace of the collective.
Go ahead and mark this date down in your cosmic calendar. It marks the beginning of another major astrological shift, this one involving the lunar nodes, which are these points in the sky that represent our collective karmic direction. And this shift is going to define our collective lessons for almost 2 full years.
So the lunar nodes basically show us our collective path. The South Node is what we as a society need to release and move on from, and starting in July 2026, it's going to be in Leo, the sign of individual pride and personal authority. The North Node is what we need to embrace, where we're headed, and it's going to be in Aquarius, the sign of the group of humanitarianism and collective progress.
I mean, the message from the stars couldn't be any clearer. The collective lesson for all of us is to start moving away from the cult of the individual and learn how to deny the ego's constant demands so we can serve a greater collective purpose.
And this astrological theme of sacrificing the individual for the collective is perfectly, and I mean perfectly, mirrored in the central paradox of Kaali herself. She is the ultimate destroyer, right? Yet she's also known as Kaali Ma, the Divine Mother. She's absolutely terrifying, yet her devotees see her as the ultimate protector. Her chaos is precisely what restores a higher cosmic order.
So, the most important thing to get about Kaali is that her violence is never, ever meaningless. It always serves a higher collective purpose. She is the mother who does terrible things to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Her destruction is, at its heart, a creative, protective, and ultimately, a loving act.
All right, let's bring all these threads together. What we really have here are two profoundly different maps, one from ancient myth, one from the cosmos, that when you look closely appear to be charting the exact same journey of human transformation. I mean, just look at this. When we put it all side by side, the parallels are just uncanny. The concept of destruction. You've got consuming the demon versus Pluto's death and rebirth process. Ego death. Kaali's terrifying form mocking the ego versus releasing the South Node in Leo. Time. Kaali as the all-devouring force versus Saturn as the taskmaster. And rebirth. Attaining spiritual liberation or moksha versus moving toward the collective North Node in Aquarius. It's incredible.
At the end of the day, that's what we're looking at. Different metaphors for the exact same fundamental human experiences of crisis, breakdown, and breakthrough. One system speaks in the ancient, visceral language of mythology, of gods and demons. The other speaks in the more abstract, mathematical language of celestial mechanics, of planets and orbits.
Ultimately, both of these maps are pointing to the same profound truth, which is captured so beautifully in this quote, that creative renewal can only emerge from a void, from a state of complete dissolution. And while that process can be absolutely terrifying, it's within that very darkness that the seeds of our own rebirth are held.
And so, that leaves us with a final question to really ponder. Seeing these grand cosmic maps, understanding these huge cycles of destruction and rebirth, how can we learn to better embrace them in our own lives? How can we find the courage to face our own inner Kaali, or to surrender to our own cosmic transformations, trusting that on the other side of all the ashes lies renewal?